I get students all the time. I've been playing since I was 16 years old. I'm 45 years old. I play the same five things. Well, you play the same five things because you've learned this song and you've learned this song, you learned this song, and don't know what anything's about, and you can't go beyond it.
Hi, and welcome to ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Leapman, founder and first baseman. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside For Bass Players Only, a lot of them over 50, learning bass, having the time of their life playing music that they love. You should come join them so you can see what it's like to experience that incredible transformation for yourself. As I always say, you're never too old to groove, so let's play bass. My guest this week is Charley Sabatino. He's also a bass educator. He's a bass player, a composer. He's based in New York City. Charley, who plays both upright and electric bass, has performed everywhere from iconic clubs like the Village Gate to Stockholm Jazz Festival. I used to go to the Village Gate and the Vanguard and all those places way back in the day, way back when there was 48th Street in New York, which is, well, it's still 48th Street, but it doesn't have all the cool music stores. Charley's been on the Today Show, backing the Children's Aid Society Chorus, and he's performed at Lincoln Center with Ben Vereen and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. Charley teaches electric and upright bass, as well as theory and improvisation, both in person and remotely to students of all levels and ages. He's an adjunct professor at York College in Queens, and he's also a volunteer teacher for Guitar for Vets. And he gives clinics on the fundamentals of electric and upright bass, as well as improvisation for all instruments. Charley holds a Master of Arts in Music degree from LIU. I believe that's Long Island University, right? CW
Yep.
Post. And he studied with, get this, Billy Bauer, Harvey S., Jeff Andrews, Tony Oppenheim, Lynn Christie, Mike Pope, and Raul Plesko. Woo! This is his first time on For Bass Players Only. Welcome, Charley. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We met, well, about a month and a half ago. There was a special dinner. David Sutkin from Bass Up Front, awesome Facebook group on all about...
Probably one of the best.
Yes, and Charley and I were both invited. That's where we met, and we were sitting at a table. I had my wife and my son with me. Charley was there, as was Jonas Hellborg and Bobby Vega and Tony Paleo, and the conversation just was, I can't even describe it. Can you imagine that group of people talking bass and music? And we didn't all agree on everything, which kind of made it even more interesting.
But that's what's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Charley and I have both known about each other, and we got to meet each other, and we totally geeked out on all things bass and all things music. So I want to talk to you about what you've got going on and what you're doing, but I'd like to lead up to that from the beginning. Let's start by hearing you tell your story about your initial exposure to music, how you became a bass player, your musical upbringing. How did all that come to be?
I messed around a little bit when I was younger, on guitar a little bit, because I was raised in a small town in New Jersey, and wasn't much music going on. Even the schools didn't have any real music programs, public or private. And one day in early high school, one of my classmates, Angus McGeckran, who was a bass player already, came to my house and said, "You have to listen to this." And he put Quadrophenia on my turntable, and I heard The Real Me, which every bass player knows, and I went, "That's what I want to do."
Awesome.
And that's where it went from there. I found a used bass, and a guitar teacher in the area taught me a little bit of bass, and I messed around a little bit there. And I eventually made my way to New York City, to the city itself. And I found other players, and I found other teachers, and led to my education. And the rest is where I am now.
So,
hours and hours and hours of woodshed.
yeah. Well, what I could assume that John Entwistle was one of your influences. Did you start listening to music differently once you discovered the bass? And who were some of your other bass players?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously started listening to more bass because I was that's what I was playing. Um, from there, it's funny because my background is in jazz, and a lot of people think I came out of the womb listening to Miles, and that's not true. I started in hard rock and metal and all that stuff is, young people do. I listened. I was a big Rush head. I was, very influenced by that. And then I got into more things like Jeff Beck and some of the fusiony stuff, and then Stanley and all of them. And from them led into to Straight Ahead, right? And from Straight Ahead, especially doing a lot of downtown work, I got into some of the more avant-garde things that went on. Some of the things we talked about actually at that dinner, and now I'm kind of like a conglomerate of all of that, at least in the music that I write and I compose and that I have done. It just led that way. And as I got more and more into it, I had teachers that taught me about listening to all of the music, not just the bass, of course, and listening to all aspects of music. And the more we listen to, the more we come back to our own music.
I'm curious about a couple of things. You said that you 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 discovered the bass or a particular aspect of the bass when you heard Quadrophenia. You also mentioned that you're kind of known as a jazz player. What were you listening to before Quadrophenia? Were your parents into, with brothers and
No,
sisters?
I was
Did
in a
you have
pretty
records
much
playing around the house? And
no, pretty much non-musical family, talk radio. Frankly, it was discouraged from almost day one, so I kind of had to do it on the sly. Um,
what exactly was discouraged?
my music.
What listening to certain music or
No,
studying
before
music?
playing. No, not listening. Yeah, it was.
Your
It
parents are
wasn't
old school
exactly.
traditional? Is that what you're
I'm.
getting?
What's that?
Your parents were kind of old school traditional. Is that what you're?
Yeah, about as old school and traditional as you get. Yeah.
Okay.
Um. Uh. So, excuse my bell. Um. So it was kind of discouraged. So I listened to some things, and it got more as I got out of the house. With other friends' houses, and going to see bands. Of course, there was a pretty good live band scene in the area I was growing up. Bars were playing live bands, and live bands were playing at the high schools. Live bands were playing all over. So I saw a lot of that. And again, having friends that were musicians, I got to see a lot more, and it brought me more into where I wanted to go. Before Quadrophenia, I was listening to Kiss, and I was listening to, all the album radio stuff, but I didn't listen to it the same. Once I heard that, I'm like, that's it. That's what I want to do.
It's funny because I didn't see that in you either. So you said people are surprised because you came up, being a jazz player. You're known for
I'm not even. I would say a closet. I'm still a metalhead. I
really.
still listen. Yeah, I listen to bands like Arch Enemy, Cannibal Corpse, Ginger. Yeah, because it you have to be diverse, in my opinion. I use a lot of culinary references when I teach because my family's had a restaurant for almost 100 years, so it's just in the family. It's just like the Italian chef that spends 2 years in Singapore because they need to bring something else back. So for me, I just listen to different things. I've been doing a game on my Spotify lately. I'll just throw a random song in and then see where it leads.
Wow.
Because you never know. You hear a song that you haven't heard in a long time. You hear a song that you didn't really know, or you hear a remake, and it brings more back to your playing.
Just on a tangent, you reminded me. My wife and I have been watching a show called Somebody Feed Phil. It's with Phil Rosenthal, the guy that created Everybody Loves Raymond.
I've heard about that. I just heard about that.
And he's so funny, just the faces he makes and some of the things he eats though. But he goes to Dubai and Iceland and Brazil and Washington and Korea and just all over the world to eat, just even the food. And a lot of the chefs that he meets were inspired by other people, just like you're saying, like music. So there's a parallel there.
I've picked up a lot as an educator. I mean, I had one student that was big. It was a young player, but he was big into 80s Japanese heavy metal.
Yeah, there was a lot of it.
Right. But I mean, I knew some of it. I did. And he would bring some of this stuff in and I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea this stuff existed. So, you bring, different things. And I'm a firm believer in diversity in art because yeah, it's fine that you like James Jamerson, but there's more to life than just him. I mean, he's amazing. He was iconic, but there's other things. There are other players and other aspects that are there. I taught a lot of players from South America back in the day. They came to me to learn how to read, how to slap. They taught me more than I ever taught them. They taught me about regional tumbajos. They taught me about regional rivalries, things I had no idea about. It just blew me away.
You make me think of I majored in jazz in both my undergrad and my graduate programs, and it's funny. It's almost like it shouldn't be labeled jazz. In my undergrad, it was jazz studies and contemporary media, and at the graduate degree was in studio music and jazz. And I tell the story a lot. It's like jazz players. I played in the orchestra at University of Miami, and we were playing a Stravinsky piece, Petrushka, I think it was. And for some reason, the conductor called everybody in the orchestra into his office one at a time to play little excerpts. Play this part, play this part. And Stravinsky, there's stuff in 5/8, and it's all these meter changes and key changes and all this stuff. And I'm playing for him with the bow, and I just, I nailed it, okay? And he says to me, he looks, he says, "Are you a jazz major?" I said, "Yes, I am. Why do you ask?" He says, "Because the jazz people seem to be able to play anything. They can play everything. So if you're on a jazz gig, it's not unusual for somebody to say, well, this is like a country vibe, or this is like an R&B, or this is like a rock thing." And the jazz people don't think twice about it. They just, okay, whatever it is, as opposed to having...
Because jazz, like blues, like Baroque, and like some classical, other classical, is it's improvisatory in nature. I mean, yeah, fine, you have a chart, right? But it goes beyond the chart. There's no such thing as a jazz cover band, right? So, right. So, I mean, I would do gigs all the time. If I was running a gig, we would do a song like, like Someone to Love. I said, let's do it in 6.
Yeah.
Why not? Because that's the nature of the music, and some rock is that too. It's just that when you're open to that, that's why I think sometimes I tell players that I'm not going to make you a jazz player, but I want you to understand the jazz mindset, because if you have the jazz mindset, so much more is open to you.
What is the jazz mindset exactly?
In my opinion, it's that you look at the music freshly every time. Charlie Hayden talks about it in his autobiography, which is a great read. He says you have to look at the music fresh every time. I don't care if you played the song 1,000 times. I don't care if it's Sweet Home Alabama. You still look at it freshly every time. So, and it's knowing the harmony intimately, knowing it, at least the way I was taught. The way Billy Bauer is the one that did this to me, and he actually was a disciple. Not really a disciple, but he was involved in the Tristano school.
Right, the cool school, West Coast.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't he wasn't a student of Tristano, but he played with him. So I found out later that the way he taught me was to right exactly line in with the Tristano school, is knowing everything by the notes, no patterns, no licks, no riffs. No, and he taught me, every note, every function, what it sounds like against the harmony in here and in here. So the mindset is that if you're playing in a band, even if you're playing in a cover band, and all of a sudden the guitar player wants to make it left, you can follow. It's that mindset that nothing is set in stone.
I love it. Yeah, that's a good interpretation. By the way, just on another tangent, Charlie Hayden had a son-in-law who's pretty well known. Do you know who one of his triplet daughters married?
No.
Jack Black.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes, yes. Now that you say it, yes, you're right. All right, that's right. Now, as you said it, now I remember. Yeah.
I'm just trying to picture Jack and Charlie at a family function or something, just sitting and talking and which way the conversation would go.
Yeah, but differences are good.
Oh, absolutely. So, how did your career get rolling? What kind of stuff were you doing initially?
Um, well, I mean, I was young, so I was doing just bunch of guys get together and be in a band kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I did a fair amount of sideman stuff. I lucked out that there were a couple of things I did where they were, rock bands, but they were paying rock bands, and of varying qualities. From there, I started a family, so I started doing, what we call in New York club dates, weddings in corporate. Right. I did that for 13 or so years, and I taught before that, and then I got burned out in the club date thing, so I started teaching more, and then the teaching just started rolling. And actually, a student that studied with me when he was very young, I used to teach at a music store here in Queens, and he was very young. And in 2006, he found me again, and we started studying. We became friends, and like 2008 and 2000 around there, he just said, "You know what? You got to do this remote thing," and I started doing remote lessons in 2010. So that obviously increased my student base that way. And then when COVID hit, I was already running,
Yeah.
But also I was doing some jazz stuff. I was working on my own music. I did an avant-garde thing with a vocalist. She was a pianist and a vocalist, and we traveled through Europe doing that. It's called the Velocity Duo. You can find some of it. It's pretty out. But in Europe, especially we were in Berlin and we were in Stockholm. Some of the out stuff that is very much in.
So if the people knew what they were going to hear, they weren't like, "What the hell is that?"
No. Europe is a different animal.
Yes.
In terms of that, I mean, Jonas's girlfriend Anna and I have been corresponding quite a bit since NAMM, and we've been sending each other's music, but she sent me an hour.
Me some stuff too, actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Yes.
I love her. I was telling you, what I like about her is that it's not just singer-songwriter stuff. The guitar and the vocals juxtapose.
Yeah.
And I like that. It shows texture, it shows interest.
Yes.
But she sent me an hour-long thing that Jonas did in I think it was in Stockholm, and it's very much the kind of stuff that I've done. And stuff that I'm actually have a gig Wednesday. It's gonna be very similar. It's free improvisation and stuff. Over there, it's much more accepted. In fact, the head of my department at your college, he's half Austrian, and he spent every summer in Austria because his dad is a bass player, and he's from Austria. And he said in certain parts of Europe, the jazz standards are only considered things to learn from. Like nobody goes and plays standards and they want to hear your stuff.
Cool.
So it goes even farther. They don't want to hear all the things you are. They say that's what you learn that when you're studying. We want to know your stuff.
How do you prepare for a gig like that, an avant-garde gig?
It's funny because it's some of the stuff that Jonas talked about. It's knowing the players, if you do know the players, knowing the venue, knowing the crowd, if you know the venue. But it's what I said before. It's knowing harmony. It's knowing things like motivic development, which is part of either composition or improvisation. It's understanding things like harmonics, that everything is brought together. It's a conversation like you and I are having. It's opening your ears, and it's not just opening your ears and like, oh, that's a B flat. It's like, no, where is that going? You know, Billy taught me an amazing, and I've been teaching it now for years, setup of ear training. That's not just, you know, knowing classical ear training, like, you know, is that a minor third? Is that a major third? It's linking what's in here to here. It's either an idea that you hear from the outside or an idea that's in here goes to the hands. And it's really old school. One of my teachers, Dr. Christie, who you saw was in my bio, he told me when he was raised in Christchurch, New Zealand, he said when he was going to get into the orchestra as a child, they said, okay, 2 years of the chorus before you touched an instrument.
Wow.
The only other professional musician in my family was my grandfather's first cousin. In Italian, they say they call Parina. My Parina Arthur, who was a professional musician. He played with Barnum Bailey Circus and all that. He told me
that is a tough book. That is like the toughest book in show business, people.
Yeah. But he did all the Italian circuses. He did Barnum and Bailey back in the day. Wow. And died at 103. It played until he died. But he said his brother would wake him up and singing Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do every morning. Because it's understanding that the voice, whether externally, because some people play when they, you know, sing when they play, and I'm one of them, right? Either externally, internally is the way to get the ideas to the hands. Because too many players and scores of players I've taught, you know, multi-platinum producers, and I've taught you know, bedroom players and everything in between, and everything seems to come from here to here instead of the other way around.
Let's talk about you as a music educator. For Bass Players Only, as I mentioned, is a bass instruction site. I also mentioned that, or hinted that, most of the people, or certainly a lot of them, that come to For Bass Players Only to learn bass are men in their 50s, 60s, 70s. I've got students in their 80s. And I guess I have a few younger ones, not too many. I have a few women. Actually, we're getting more women now. But I just wanted to ask you what advice you can impart to those people, because they're not looking to make a career out of it. They're not looking to travel around the world playing sold out arenas to their adoring fans. They're not looking to get called by you know, Quincy Jones to play on a film or something like that. They want to play some classic rock riffs with their buddies, or some blues shuffles, maybe a little walking bass, maybe a little funk R&B. Some of them are into slapping. But also, when people get into their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, sometimes things like arthritis and tendonitis creep in. Some people may be recovering from surgery. I'm not trying to paint a bleak picture here. I'm just trying to give you an overall context.
Right.
So you can answer the question. So what advice could you impart to somebody like that who wants to learn to play bass?
The question I always get about that, well, I'm not going to music school, I don't need to know this, I get that all the time, is that if you were taking a cooking class, you know, not to become a chef, but just say you want to cook with your wife or with your friends, they still teach you the fundamentals of cooking. They don't just say, here, make this. Right? They teach you how to use a knife. They teach you the different pots and pans. They teach you how to do different sauteing, braising, and all that stuff. So you can sit there and have fun with your friends and cook, not for a living, but you can do stuff, right? So it's the same thing with music. Knowing the fundamentals, not saying you have to practice 12 hours a day for them, but knowing the fundamentals allows you to play with your friends or do whatever you do that much better. Because it's not just a thing. You can do something with that thing. I get students all the time. I've been playing since I was 16 years old. I'm 45 years old. I play the same 5 things. Well, you play the same 5 things because you've learned this song and you've learned this song, you've learned this song, and don't know what anything's about, and you can't go beyond it. But again, it's not 12 hours a day. It's just understanding what you're doing.
Okay, I have an idea in my head when you say fundamentals, what that means to me. What exactly does that mean to you?
Knowing the board, knowing the notes, knowing what chords are, or knowing the chords, know what they are, what their function is. If you're going to play a pentatonic scale, know what a pentatonic scale is and what it does for you, what it sounds like. voice leading is probably the one that I have the biggest problem with. Understanding that chords move and your bass line has to move with it. And I'm not talking classical voice leading that you and I studied. I'm not talking about, the medieval stuff we did. I'm talking about
Cantus firmus. Remember the Cantus firmus? Did you study that?
Did you do Gratus ad Parnassum? That book made me crazy.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it was the Grata. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't even get me started. But it's understanding that how chords move. So when you're making a bass line or augmenting a bass line, say you're playing a blues, right, or you're playing a simple bass line that's just roots, because that's what the song is, and you want to go beyond that. Well, what do? You do the riff you did all your life. No, you understand. So going from a G to a C to a whatever. Okay, what notes can I use to go from the G to the C? What do they sound like? What can I do? Oh, the next time around, I want to do something different. Okay, that kind of thing. That, to me, that's fundamental. Understanding rhythm, not only being able to follow a drummer, but understanding the rhythm so you can juxtapose those rhythms intelligently, especially like guys who learn slap. The biggest problem I have with slap, and I studied with Tony. I think Tony's is the best method there is, but it's still riff based. 99.99999% of the time I ever slapped, it was over chords. It wasn't an E riff for 45 minutes. It was over a set of chords. And there isn't a book out there I found, and if anybody knows one, let me know, that explains how to slap over chords. They tell you how to slap, they tell you how to do this thing and that thing, but there's not, somebody gives you a chord progression, slap over it. I've taught it, I've been teaching slap since 1984. I've never had a bass player come to me that could competently slap over a set of chords without it being a riff.
Have you seen my slapping book?
No, please send it to me. I'll use it from day one if it's what I'm looking for.
It's
Because
called funk
the
bass.
method, the whole idea is that you have to make music with whatever technique you learn.
Everything I teach is groove oriented. Even my scales groove. I think everything, if you need to learn the fundamentals like you're talking about, why can't you do your chromatic runs or your scales or your string crossings or arpeggios in a way that's musically satisfying and rewarding and fun to play and grooves?
The only caveat I have to that, and the only caveat is sometimes if you learn things in the heat of battle, which I mean is like during a groove or something like that, the hands tend to take over before the brain does. I do this thing called slow methodic practice. Am I plugged in? No, I'm not plugged in. Let me just plug in real quick. I call it slow methodic practice. And what I mean by that is that you sit there and say, okay, I'm playing, this, G. All right. So I'm thinking about what I want to do there. It's like, well, let me think about it. Well, I'm on the G. I'm getting to I'm going to do something over the C. What notes would I use? Well, I can go. Oh, okay. You'll give yourself a chance to think about what you're doing, and then go into what you're saying. Because if not, it becomes the same thing every time. Because you're always in the heat of battle, and you don't give your brain a chance to think of all the possibilities. And that's the thing. It's thinking all the possibilities so you have them in your head. If not, it's going to be the same thing every time.
That's interesting. I haven't even thought about that because I don't take that approach. I think about the music and I think about the overall, what is it going to sound like, not how am I going to move my fingers to survive and to stay alive in this heat of battle.
Right, but the thing is you got to give it. Billy taught me this. He said you got to do it slowly so you can find it, especially when you talk about improvisation, because everybody has the riffs they want to do, and after a while they get old.
Yeah.
You got to give yourself a chance to think like, okay, if I'm doing if I'm doing something like if I'm doing a 2-5-1, okay, all the different things that I can do. It's like, okay, what can I do? Well, I got the D. All right, what can I do over the G? I could do a G7 flat 9. Okay, and then to the C. Give yourself a chance to think, and then you put on a play along. And then you can play. And they go back and say, okay, now what if I do it a different way? What if I start here? But you do it slowly, so you give yourself a chance to think of the possibilities. If not, you do the same thing again, 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 and then you're in a rut.
But then you do want to get to a point where you don't really have to belabor the thinking. It just should come
Right,
naturally.
but the woodshed is the place to obsess.
Yeah.
So the woodshed should be nothing but belabored thinking. So
Gotcha.
when you go outside, you can play.
Yeah. I
I
saw,
spend hours in this room belaboring and thinking.
yeah, I know what that's about. I saw Al Di Meola give a clinic one time, and somebody asked him a question about theory. And he says, if you're playing and you're thinking about theory, you haven't got it. And I thought that was
Oh,
very
on what in the performance, absolutely.
yes, absolutely. And I
It's
try to,
you think of it as grammar. You did the grammar in school, so when you talk to somebody, you don't have to worry about conjugating the verbs unless you're using a language you're not that familiar with, right? But you
yeah,
have to put in the time.
absolutely.
So going back to what you said about, people just want to play. The whole idea then is structure your practice time, not rehearsal time, not learning tunes, so that you can make the most of the amount of time you have. So, you've seen my posts. I talk about planning your practice, having making it that you have a schedule, so you can sit there. Even if you want to say, I only want to do like 20 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day, that's fine. But you make the most of that 15 minutes.
Absolutely.
That's a lot. And going back to the arthritis, etc. I had a guy at NAM. He came to me at the Yamaha booth. He says, I love playing, but I got arthritis in both my hands. I said, pick up the bass. And he had a posture issue. He was playing the double bass mainly with his hands. It's like, no, man, you got to pull from the shoulders. And he came back the next day. He said he had some relief.
Wow.
So as far as that, part of the woodshed is obsessing over your posture. Making sure that you're not clenching the bass like someone's going to rip it out of your hand. Gary Carr, one of my Dr. Christie was a disciple of Gary Carr, and he did it on the upright, and I actually have applied it to the electric of the rolling hand. So what that means is, if I'm playing with my fourth finger, these are absolutely relaxed. So I'm only using whatever finger I need to use, and everything else is relaxed. You don't have this, like I call, the grip of death that some players do. That's where it leads to tendonitis and all that. So when I'm playing, I'm shifting more than maybe you need to, but I can play as fast as anybody wants to play because I'm so relaxed. So
You ever seen Gary play in person?
I'm sorry?
You ever seen Gary Carr play in person?
No, I've only seen him. I've never seen him in person. I've only seen recordings and things through one of my teachers. I read his biography. He's a fascinating individual.
Yes, I was at a bass convention one time. I interviewed Gary Carr and Francois Rabath on the same day.
Uh-oh. That's like the Hatfields and the McCoys.
I never thought of it that way, but Francois Rabath with the crab. He was on the beach and he saw a crab, and he said,
Yeah.
"Look how symmetrically you move and everything, and even how the crab. So why can't we do something like that on the bass?" And he came up with this left hand technique, the crab technique. Awesome stuff. What's keeping you busy these days, Charlie? What are you up to?
Composing. I'm working with a trio. With it's actually myself on double bass, a clarinetist and an alto sax, and it's the clarinetist is Guillermo Gregorio, who's a composer from Argentina. He's done a lot of stuff in Chicago and stuff. And we're doing a trio. We just did some recordings, and we're trying to work on the release of that. And I just wrote for that band a suite of 17 movements that we're starting to rehearse. I have my own music that I'm trying to figure out financially how to record, and my own practice, and I get called for freelance gigs here and there, and teaching, obviously. Teaching in the university has been interesting because I haven't worked for anybody in decades. So there's a lot of stuff I'm not used to.
It's different, isn't it?
Well, training sessions and signing all these like reports and papers I've never had to do, you know.
I worked in higher education for 26 years, and one of the first things somebody told me was when you work in education, you should go in knowing that every year we get a year older, but the students stay the same age. Think about that, huh? You mentioned Yamaha. I don't know if you mentioned anything else as far as gear goes, but what about your bases and your equipment, your gear, all that stuff?
You don't know me very well, but I'm not a real big gearhead, right? Actually, Tony Paleo makes fun of me quite a bit because sometimes I'll text him like I got a problem because I don't really the gear I have is the gear I like, but I'm not a big gearhead. I'm endorsed by Lakeland, so I use theirs. I have 3 of their bases that I use pretty much every day. This one they just made for me a couple of months ago, which is just outstanding.
What's the guy? John Picciarelli?
Piericello, the Piericello brothers, John, Steve, and Bo.
Okay, I knew there were 2. I didn't even know there were 3.
Yeah, there's 3. Bo does the pickup, Steve does the cutting, John is the president, and he does a good amount of the finishing. There's other staff in there too. Zachary Livingston's another guy in there, amazingly talented. But I've been endorsed by them since 2012. Their gear, for me, gear has to work, and aside from being beautiful and well made, it works, and that's what I use. I only have 3 of them. That's all I have. That's all I use. I have this. Let me switch cameras. I can show you this. Oh, I gotta do this. I'll bring you to the upright cam. Hopefully it'll work. Yep, there it is. This is an instrument I got in 2021.
Beautiful.
I saved for it for 25 years. It's a 1920 Hawks Panormo. It's a French origin. I got it up at Upton Bass.
What's his name? Gary, right?
Yeah.
Gary,
and Eric Roy is the manager up there. But I've saved for this bass, like I said, for 20 years, 25 years. It just got a great sound. I got the extender. I use Glasser bows, and I have a Lipkins bow. I don't know if you know who Sue Lipkins is. She's a bow maker up in Woodstock. Makes amazing bows. I play German grip.
I was going to say, do you always play German, or do you play?
Yeah, I teach both, but German is the first one that ever was ever handed to me, and so that's what I use.
Yeah, when I first started I started electric bass when I was 15, and then when I was 19, I started studying upright with Max Janowski, who played in the Detroit Symphony. And I was talking to him on the phone before I even met him. He says, "Do you play French bow or German bow?" Huh? Okay, I'm going to start you on German bow, and that's all I've ever been comfortable with. When I pick up a French bow, I hold it like a German bow.
I find personally. I find because most, I do a little bit of classical, but I'm primarily a jazz guy. I solo with the bow. I find it much better control.
Which?
The German bow.
German. Yeah.
Especially like if you're doing like with this group I just said, when Guillermo writes stuff, he likes to do a lot of saltelier bow, and I find it so much more better, so much easier with the German bow.
Wait, you use solo strings on the upright?
No, I use Perastro Perpetual. I've been using the Stark ones because they're a little thicker, and I find them, they work well. They work.
What about pickups and amps and that kind of stuff?
Pickups are stock. I think I've changed in my entire career. I think I've changed pickups twice in my entire career, and always put them back.
You're talking about electric, I assume, right?
Yeah, on that I use a Realist. I've used the Realist since I started.
David Gage.
Yeah, I tried other ones. It's just too complicated. What I like about it is that it's clean, it's clear. I plug it in, no feedback, and I can keep going. I'm a Phil Jones artist, and I use his stuff. Again, I was working with another amp company, and I just wasn't like the way I was treated. And I've known Mike Albranda for.
Oh, every time I see Mike, he's always schlepping something.
He schleps for a living.
He's a hard
But I've
worker.
known him forever,
And
and
Phil is a hoot. Phil is a
he
hoot.
said he brought me in, and the thing I love about them is that they're absolutely transparent. I like, let me explain. If you notice this bass, it's flat. I 99 times out of 100 play my instruments flat, because if they don't sound the way I want flat, I don't want them. To me, this stuff is depending on the room. Like I do one gig every year. It's a jazz gig, but I have to play an electric for logistical reasons, and the sound guy must be like a metal guy because it's all high end. So I have to turn off all my high end on the bass, things like that. My amps, I start absolutely flat, and then it depends on the room. Like the gig I'm doing Wednesday has a couple of really nasty dips, so I have to EQ a little bit. But I like everything. I just plug in and go. I don't want to worry about stuff. I know, and like I said, guys like Tony and John Moody and all my friends, they make fun of me because I don't. They ask me like, "Oh, what's this?" I'm like, I don't know. I just play. I worry about playing. I don't worry about anything else. Once I have gear that works for me, the conversation's over.
I'm a lot like you. I remember back in the 80s, MIDI, trying to subscribing to Music Technology magazine, electronic musician. I don't get it. And then I found, like you're saying or alluding to, it was taking me away from my playing. I would rather just focus on what I want to do and not, how many, I don't even know the words, but
I was taught that 95% of the tone is here.
Is in the hands.
And I feel I play like me on any instrument, provided it's set up correctly, and all that. I don't worry. I mean, the stuff I have, I absolutely love, but it's because they allow me to do what I need to do. I have the Lakelands. I have a 4-string I use for teaching, a 5-string I use for teaching, and I have an E to C5 I use for jazz. That's it.
Oh, so for your soloing up on the highs.
Yes. Because I played 6-string for a lot of years and it just got too heavy.
What about the future, Charlie? What else that you haven't mentioned? Is there something else that you've always wanted to do and haven't gotten around to yet, or something that someday I'm gonna?
No, I don't think that way. I just going back to Billy. Billy always said we're all on the same road, just in a different place. And for me, it's just working the road. I think I was profiled by a guitar player, a bass player a while back, and they asked me exactly that, and I said to keep playing, learning, exploring until 45 minutes after they bury me. Just for me, it's every day is another day for the woodshed, or for like I'm teaching or thinking about. Like I have a notebook on my piano there that I use. I start on paper things I'm working on, and I transfer them to the computer. It just every day is that.
Well, keep doing it. It's working for you.
I hope. Bills are paid.
I have one more question for you. What would you be if you were not a bass player? Something
Zookeeper.
Outside of music.
Zookeeper.
A zookeeper for real?
My daughter is involved in animals. She's a veterinary assistant right now, but she worked as an associate keeper at the Bronx Zoo, which is 18 minutes from my house. And I did this, and I said, "Oh my God, if I had known this when I was a kid, I'd have been a zookeeper on a heartbeat."
Wow.
I'm a total nerd. You don't know me well enough. I cultivate. You can't see over here, but I cultivate carnivorous plants. It's just something I do. All work and no play. I have three of my plants going into the Bronx Zoo right now in exhibits.
What carnivorous plants? You mean plants that eat meat?
Yeah. It's just a hobby that I did that takes me, when I need to get away from this for a minute, that's one of the things I do. And because of that, I know people in the zoo and stuff, and I would have done that in a heartbeat.
I'm sorry. This is a totally ignorant question, but you feed meat to a plant?
Yeah. Not meat, not like a steak. They eat insects.
Okay. They eat. I don't even think of plants as eat. I've heard of plant food, but sprinkle.
They come from places for instance, in Borneo, which there's a lot of terrestrial caves, and there's a lot of bats, and the primary predators are bats. But when after they finish eating at night, they go back underneath into the caves, and their guano drops in the bat, so there's none in the soil. So the soil's low in nutrients. So they evolved to eat meat, to eat bugs. Some of them are big enough they can grab rodents and stuff, but
fascinating. I never know what's going to come up during these interviews.
it's just something. I'm a firm believer that all work and no play. You got to do something else.
Yeah.
Cook, collect stamps, hike, whatever,
There you go. Well, this is fascinating, Charlie, and I'm sure we can get into more stuff, but we'll have to do a follow-up interview and just pick up where we left off, and we can
love to.
Any rabbit hole we choose. But thanks so much for taking the time. I know the audience has certainly gotten a lot out of it. I've gotten a lot out of it. You made me think about a lot of different things. So much luck, continued success to you. Keep doing what you're doing, and I hope our paths cross again soon and often in person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
It's my pleasure. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside the For Bass Players Only community, a lot of them over 50, learning bass, playing the music that they love, and having the time of their life. You should come join them so you can experience that incredible transformation for yourself. As I always say, you're never too old to groove, so let's play bass. Thanks to my special guest, Charley Sabatino, who also is a bass educator, and he's been doing it for a long time, and he is good at it. I will see you all right here next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, let's play bass.